Passion of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Matthew. One of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said,
"What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?"
They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that time on he looked for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples approached Jesus and said,
"Where do you want us to prepare for you to keep the Passover?"
He said,
Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says my appointed time draws near. In your house I shall celebrate the Passover with my disciples.
The disciples then did as Jesus had ordered and prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he reclined at table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said,
Amen, I say to you, one of you will betray me.
Deeply distressed at this, they began to say to him, one after another.
"Surely it is not I, Lord."
He said in reply,
He who has dipped his hand into the dish with me is the one who will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes, as is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that man if he had never been born.
Then Judas, his betrayer, said in reply,
"Surely it is not I, Rabbi."
He answered.
You have said so.
While they were eating, Jesus took bread, said a blessing, broke it, and giving it to his disciples, said,
Take and eat. This is my body.
Then he took a cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying,
Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which will be shed on behalf of many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, from now on I shall not drink this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it with you new in the kingdom of my Father.
Then, after singing a hymn, they went up to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them,
This night all of you will have your faith in me shaken, for it is written, I shall strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be dispersed. But after I have been raised up, I shall go before you to Galilee.
Peter said to him in reply,
But all may have their faith be shaken. Mine will never be.
Jesus said to him,
Amen, I say to you, this very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.
Peter said to him,
Even though I should have to die with you, I will not deny you.
and all the disciples spoke likewise. Then Jesus came to them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples,
Sit here while I go over there and pray.
He took along Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to feel sorrow and distress. Then he said to them,
My soul is sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and keep watch with me.
He advanced a little and fell prostrate in prayer, saying,
My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will.
When he returned to his disciples, he found them asleep. He said to Peter,
So you could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not undergo the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Withdrawing a second time, he prayed again.
My Father, if it is not possible that this cup pass without my drinking it, your will be done.
Then he returned once more and found them asleep, for they could not keep their eyes open. He left them and withdrew again and prayed a third time, saying the same thing again. Then he returned to his disciples and said to them,
Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand when the Son of Man is to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let us go. Look, my betrayer is at hand.
While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, accompanied by a large crowd with swords and clubs, who had come from the chief priests and elders of the people. His betrayer had arranged a sign with them, saying,
The man I shall kiss is the one. Arrest him.
Immediately he went over to Jesus and said,
Hail, Rabbi.
and he kissed him. Jesus answered him.
Friend, do what you have come for.
Then stepping forward, they laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. And behold, one of those who accompanied Jesus put his hand to the sword, drew it, and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him,
Put your sword back into its sheath, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot call upon my Father, and you will not provide me at this moment with more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the Scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must come to pass in this way?
At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds,
Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to seize me? Day after day I sat teaching in the temple area, yet you did not arrest me. But all this has come to pass that the writings of the prophets may be fulfilled.
and all the disciples left him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the high priest's courtyard, and going inside, he sat down with the servants to see the outcome. The chief priests and the entire Sanhedrin kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward who stated,
This man said, I can destroy the temple of God, and within 3 days rebuild it.
The high priest rose and addressed him.
Have you no answer? What are these men testifying against you?
But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him,
I order you to tell us under oath before the living God, either you are the Christ, the Son of God.
Jesus said to him in reply,
You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power, and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Then the high priest tore his robes and said,
He has blasphemed. What further need have we of witnesses? You now have heard the blasphemy. What is your opinion?
They said in reply,
He deserves to die.
Then they spat in his face and struck him, while some slapped him, saying, Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. One of the maids came over to him and said,
You too were Jesus'
but he denied it in front of everyone, saying,
I do not know what you're talking about.
As he went out to the gate, another girl saw him and said to those who were there,
This man was Jesus the Nazarene.
Again he denied it with an oath.
I do not know the man.
A little later, the bystanders came over and said to Peter,
Surely you too are one of them. Even your speech gives you away.
At that he began to curse and to swear.
I do not know the man.
And immediately a cock crowed. Then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken. Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. He went out and began to weep bitterly. When it was morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, deeply regretted what he had done. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying,
I have sinned and betrayed innocent blood.
They said,
What is that to us? Look to it yourself.
Flinging the money into the temple, he departed and went off and hanged himself. The chief priests gathered up the money but said,
It is not lawful to deposit this in the temple treasury, for it is the price of blood.
After consultation, they used it to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why that field even today is called the Field of Blood. Then was fulfilled what had been said to Jeremiah the prophet, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of a man and the price of his head, a price set by some of the Israelites, and they paid it out at the potter's field, just as the Lord had commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor and questioned him.
Are you the king of the Jews?
Jesus said,
You say so.
and when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he made no answer. Then Pilate said to him,
Do you not hear how many things they are testifying against you?
but he did not answer him one word, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now on the occasion of the feast, the governor was accustomed to release to the crowd one prisoner whom they wished. But at that time he had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had assembled, Pilate said to them,
Which one do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus called Christ?
for he knew that it was out of envy that they had handed him over. While he was still seated on the bench, his wife sent him the message, Have nothing to do with that righteous man. I suffered much in a dream today because of him. The chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas, but to destroy Jesus. The governor said to them in reply,
Which of the two do you want me to release to you?
They answered,
Barabbas. Let him be crucified.
But he said,
Why? What evil has he done?
they only shouted louder.
Let him be crucified.
When Pilate saw that he was not succeeding at all, but that a riot was breaking out instead, he took water and washed his hands in the sight of the crowd, saying,
I am innocent of this man's blood. Look to it yourselves.
and the whole people said in reply,
His blood be upon us and upon our children.
and he released Barabbas to them, and after he had Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus inside the praetorium and gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped off his clothes and put a scarlet military cloak about him. Weaving a crown of thorns, they placed it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying,
Hail, King of the Jews!
They spat upon him and took the reed and kept striking him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the cloak, dressed him in his own clothes, and led him off to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a Cyrenian named Simon. This man they trusted to service to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they gave Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he had tasted it, he refused to drink. After they had crucified him, they divided his garments by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And they placed over his head the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and the other on his left. Those passing by reviled him, shaking their heads and saying,
You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross.
Likewise, the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him and said,
He saved others, he cannot save himself. So he is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let him deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, I am the Son of God.
the revolutionaries who were crucified with him also kept abusing him in the same way. From noon onward, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice,
Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani.
which means,
My God, why have you forsaken me?
some of the bystanders who heard it said,
This one is called for Elijah.
Immediately one of them ran to get a sponge. He soaked it in wine, and putting it on a reed, gave it to him to drink. But the rest said, But Jesus cried out again in a loud voice and gave up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked, rocks were split, tombs were opened, and the bodies of many saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming forth from their tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. The centurion and the men with him were keeping watch over Jesus, feared greatly when they saw the earthquake and all that was happening. And they said, There were many women there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was himself a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, and Pilate ordered it to be handed over. Taking the body, Joseph wrapped it in clean linen and laid it in his new tomb that he had hewn in the rock. Then he rolled a huge stone across the entrance to the tomb and departed. But Mary Magdalene and the other Mary remained sitting there, facing the tomb. The next day, the one following the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said,
Sir, we know that this impostor, while still alive, said, after 3 days I will be raised up. Give orders then that the grave be secured until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come and consume him and say to the people, he has been raised from the dead. This last imposture be yours first.
Pilate said to them,
The guard is yours. Go, secure it best as you can.
So they went and secured the tomb by fixing a seal to the stone and setting a guard. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Someone asked me this weekend where we get our palm branches. After all, palm trees don't grow native in northern New Hampshire. And I had to say, well, you know, I don't know. They come in a box from the Church Supply Company. I imagine they get them from some tropical location or other. And they were shipped here about a week ago, which is way too early because palms start dying as soon as you get them. They are highly perishable like any living thing. They just don't last very long. It says right on the box that you're supposed to store them in a dry, cool place between 40 and 50 degrees. As soon as you take them out of the wrappings, they begin to die. If you bring your palm home with you after Mass today and place it in your home somewhere, or if you brought back the palms from last year, you've noticed that these green living palms quickly become brown and shriveled. They become symbols not of life and triumph, but of death and decay. Their palms just don't last very long. And maybe that's appropriate. After all, those hosannas, those joyful shouts as people greeted Jesus in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday as king, lasted just one day. A few days later, they were shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." You see, popularity doesn't last very long. Those hosannas were highly perishable. You know, so often we are fickle people. We go from one emotion to another. Even our faith, we can do that. Sometimes we have these moments of triumph and excitement about our faith. We greet Jesus as our king. We want him to be the king of our life. We shout out in a moment of excitement, "I will never deny you." But then, that moment of triumph quickly passes, and we are left facing the cross, facing perhaps some suffering or pain in our life, facing some sort of rejection or persecution. You see, the road that Jesus traveled to the cross is the road that every Christian has to journey. And in those moments, so often, like the first disciples, we begin to abandon Jesus one by one. We don't do well in those tests all the time. Like Peter, we begin to think about what everyone else is thinking about us, and we deny even knowing Jesus. Like James and John, we fall asleep in the garden, and we don't even notice when the enemy comes in. Like Judas, we sell our friendship with Jesus out for some cheap pleasure or momentary thrill, a few small coins, and then we despair that Jesus could ever love us enough to forgive us and let us back in. If you do all of this while the wood is green, Jesus says, what will you do when the wood is dry? What do we do when the triumphal, exciting march of Palm Sunday turns into the way of the cross, as it always does? In those moments, do we remain faithful to Jesus? Do we know the love of God in our hearts in that moment? In those moments, sometimes we're tempted to leave the way of Jesus. Even Jesus himself was tempted. He said, "Father, if possible, let this cup pass away from me." The people said, "Jesus, come down from that cross. Why are you up there? Why do you suffer so much? What good does suffering do anyways?" But Jesus stayed up on that cross. And not every disciple abandoned him. At the foot of the cross as Jesus died, Mary Magdalene was there. Mary Magdalene was a former prostitute who had met Jesus and been forgiven. She knew, because she knew great sin and suffering in her life, how much Jesus loved her and forgave her and died for her in that moment. And the last image we are left with in Matthew's Gospel is of Mary Magdalene sitting on the ground, facing the tomb, as the body of Jesus is placed inside and a stone is rolled across the entrance. And I don't know if Mary Magdalene somewhere in the back of her mind, had some inkling that maybe the resurrection was possible. Or maybe she just loved Jesus so much she just wanted to be with him and stay with him and follow him wherever that led, even if it was to the cross or to the tomb. Or maybe in her heart she knew, because she had met Jesus, that while everything else will fail in life, though palms turn brown and even life itself come to an end, the love of God will never fail. And the love of God could not remain in that tomb forever. This week we are called to be like Mary Magdalene and sit patiently with the Lord, following him wherever he goes, knowing that even though the excitement of Palm Sunday quickly fades away, if we remain faithful to Jesus, especially with the cross, that excitement will flourish, will flower into the deeper, broader joy of Easter, the eternal joy of the resurrection, a joy that has no end.